Right, good afternoon. So we're coming into this session, as I say, no meditation. Please do stop me and make me ask this question en route. Like a bit of a sprint in places. Where we just realised it's a 30-minute slot, not a 45-minute slot. I'm Ed Holt. The claim to fame at all was the founding chairman of the first round of the DSDM Consortium 22 years ago, when it wasn't Agile. It was all about rapid application development. But RAD morphed into Agile by about 2000, and it's been Agile ever since. I've been involved with the consortium more recently on a look at extending Agile into the wider business, beyond IT. I take on board Linda's points from this morning that we haven't got a lot of scientific evidence, but there's an awful lot of anecdotal and case study evidence that does exist, and Agile is better than the way it used to be. We can make it even better if we can take it elsewhere into other parts of the organisation, and I'm sure that's a pretty good thing. So just do a couple of minutes as well, maybe a minute on the consortium for those that don't know its background and what it does today. Look at the concept of business agility, and particularly the values. And a lot of this is soft stuff, not quite as soft as mindfulness, but that engagement piece does play a part. We'll look at some of the critical factors and look at how the market as a whole might come together to create models and frameworks for business agility. Just a little bit of a timeline. So the consortium was created in '94 by a group of suppliers and vendors. It's important. It's a consortium, it's not for profit, and it's only ever published stuff to try and make thus far software development a better thing. The important little quote up there is about the importance of control and management and governance. It's not just go out there and do it, and I'm sure anyone who's been in Agile projects without governance would appreciate the need for it. Through the 2000s, the Agile movement, the founder members of the Agile Alliance, the emphasis on project management. But then most recently, the last few years, as we get into the 2010s, much more emphasis on project management. So moving away from just how to organise projects at the team level, embracing other ways of working. So those of you, we do have a stand, Josie who's here, manning the stand for us. Agile project management with Scrum. So it's a management and control framework that can sit on top and sit with multiple quotes, methods, XP and others. And the latest publication, on the software side, Estimating in Agile, which is about 10 days freshly published. We've moved from projects to programs, we now look at portfolios and the wider business, and that's really the theme of this talk. So, there's formality, there's documentation. Please pay a visit to stand to pick up whatever may interest you from the various handbooks. So these, we do small pocket books like this, bigger handbooks, training courses, and to credit individuals to go out and coach and train. So that's the consortium's ethos, is to provide intellectual property to help, thus far, help software development be a better thing. If we look at the wider, in the wider context, we look at the business for the Agile organisation or the Agile business, call it what you will. There are all sorts of macroeconomic drivers, to do more for less, to become more digital, to be more responsive to the customer, to respond to the global interconnected world, and the great rise of consumer pressure, peer pressure, feedback, instant feedback. Brands can be brought down in days and have been because of the connected world that we live in. And there was a term that I've been doing the research that I came across, which I quite like, called VUCA or VUCA, however you say it. It was McNulty in last October's Strategy in Business, talking about volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. The slides will be available afterwards, so I'm not going to go through all the detail. But that's the world in which large and small organisations live. It is a more ambiguous place. There is more complexity. There is a drive, the need to do things faster and for less. And it's the executives of organisations, whether large or small, the C-level executives, that ought to be responding to that more volatile world. So what do we mean by an agile business? We've been doing some work and we've come up with a long definition, which we decided actually wasn't very agile. So we had to very quickly produce the short version. So customer-centric, people-focused, and adapt quickly to today's fast-moving business environment. Well, isn't that a bit motherhood and apple pie? A bit like, isn't agile common sense? Well, yes it is, but that's not to say that that's how people work. Does everybody here work for organisations that can adapt quickly and move and be, they might use the words, but are they truly customer-centric and people-focused? And the other challenge is, well, isn't this just lean and, we're just trying more for less, isn't that lean and other guys? And in part it might be, but I think it's more than lean. Lean, Kanban, and those logistics techniques for production, improving production efficiency are all valid. But it's much more than that. The agile business, the agile organisation, yes, has to worry about technology, yes, has to worry about process, but it particularly has to worry about culture, and it has to worry about people, think about those things. And this is where the touch on mindfulness that we saw this morning does become relevant. It's much harder to pin down. I can document a process, I can implement a process, I can use process, online automation process technology. I can install computer systems that manage flow and check and all sorts of project management tools that are out there and have evolved over the years. The people thing is much harder to pin down, but it's the thing that makes the difference. We see it makes the difference where people get it in agile IT projects, agile software organisations. There are examples, but relatively few, I'll touch up on a few, where they get it and have adapted their other business processes or their other business domains, marketing, HR, finance, and whatever. And it's the people and the culture that really makes the difference. A couple of pictures, my favourite pictures, and probably not enough in this slide, in this presentation. It's not typical, but it's not untypical of many large organisations. Command and control, hierarchies. I particularly like the little graphic of the executives at the top, so they've got megaphones. So they're projecting, but they're not necessarily listening. There's not a two-way communication flow. We've got organisations where we've got managers managing supervisors. And yes, big companies are stripping out layers of management. And there was one really interesting survey, I can't immediately remember whose it was, that took a view of agility in large organisations, and the cohort least in favour of the agile organisations, middle managers. Why? Because they're the ones that are most threatened by an agile organisation, flatter structures, more collaborative, team-weighted working. So we've got low productivity, we've got command and control, we've got people at the shop floor or customer-facing, layers of management removed from the 7 degrees of separation from you and anyone else in the world. Well, that includes the 7 degrees of separation from you on the shop floor to the chief executive. This isn't necessarily how one might organise a more agile organisation, but to demonstrate that here's a model or representation of collaborative team working. The executives are actually in the middle. They may or may not be in open plan offices, increasingly they are, but they're part of teams. Importantly, to the outside, colours red and blue, we've got third parties, customers involved in the process. We've got suppliers involved in the process. The arms of the organisation reach out, and not tokenism, not we have a customer user group, we call it once a year, and we listen to them, but don't actually do anything about it. They're involved in the process, they're engaged in the same way that hopefully the teams are engaged. And there's no barrier to doing the right thing. In this morning's exercise, we've had a discussion about failure. We've had to own up to where we failed, and we've got applauded for failing. Failure is part of what's good about an agile organisation. Experimentation, innovation, you have the right to fail. It's not something that you should be afraid of. So I've called that a new mental model. Now how do you get there? The big question is, if you think that the right-hand side is a good thing and the left-hand side is less good, what's the blue arrow look like? We'll come back to the blue arrow later on. There were, was it 12 principles in the Agile Manifesto. I think John this morning said he couldn't remember any of them in his talk, and nor can I. But there are at least some principles, some hooks on which you can hang practice and process and activity in the way in which you work. We've come up with, but we've distilled down 4 values that we think are representative of or should be striven for in the Agile business. And that's innovation, doing new stuff over always doing what we did before, inspiring leadership over management that is just there to do its job in its box, collaborative autonomy, i.e. teams having a degree of perhaps a large degree of delegation and self-management over that hierarchy that we've seen, and a customer focus over just looking after your own interests, whatever that may be in your work. Now sometimes it's fair enough that we might need direction, we might need some top-down management in a crisis, for example. Sometimes we need to be more directed in the way in which we achieve certain tasks. But the pervading culture, we believe, should be those things highlighted in green. And just to pick out 1 or 2 quotes from people you may or may not have heard of. Einstein, I suspect you have heard of. If you always do what you've always done, you always get what you always got. So there's nothing very innovative or inspiring about just, job's worth, let's just keep going. Quite like this one, again, Steve Jobs, who was a leader and an innovator in 5 different segments of consumer technology. He was a leader. Innovation distinguishes between the leader and the follower. And there are more. Inspiring leadership, again, back to leadership. Great Grace Hopper, you manage things, you lead people. Drucker, management guru, management is doing things right, leadership is doing the right thing. So there are these sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle distinctions between management and leadership, and people, when they perhaps aspire to management roles, are not necessarily either skilled or trained in the leadership aspects of management as they climb the greasy pole. We look at collaborative autonomy. I don't want to read that one, that's far too long. That's Ward Cunningham. People who understand their collective goals and values are pretty good at self-organising as long as they are allowed to. And that again requires leadership to let go of those reins, let go of the tight control, and trust. And trust is another one of these things that pervades the Agile organisation, pervades and inspires an engaged workforce. We'll have a look at engagement in the workforce in a moment. And that great management guru, Mother Teresa and Calcutta, I can do things you cannot, you can do things I cannot, together we can do great things. Very simple, from a source that you wouldn't expect to be in a management Agile presentation, but absolutely to the point. Then finally, the customer and the imperative of being focused on the customer and doing the right thing for the customer. Now, this could be an external customer. It could equally be an internal customer. John this morning was talking about the value chain, the value stream, as stuff is produced going through a production process, eventually to land on an external customer's desk or doorstep or wherever it lands. And there is only one boss, the customer, and he can fire everybody in the company, from the chairman on down, simply by spending his money elsewhere. And we need to remember that. And there's some data that says that companies, I've got a little bit of that at the moment, that focus on the customer are much more financially successful in shareholder returns, return on value, return on equity, some of those metrics which are important in large companies, listed companies. Much better financial performance when you focus on the customer and when you get engaged workforce, who again are that interface to the customer and who are listened to internally. So there's this constant flow of information. So for your organisations, for you as individuals, if you're promoting or trying to inspire or organise or even lead agile change, these are the the four values, the four tenets that we believe you need to wrestle with as challenges. So moving from the norm of the status quo to a world where innovation is the norm, where innovation is prized, where it's accepted, where the right to fail is allowed to happen without any comeback, where you're applauded for failing. From that old school conservative management to inspiring leadership of your greatest assets. And everyone knows it's a maxim, our greatest asset is our people, except we should treat them like rubbish. I'm sure none of you work for organisations like where that could be accused of happening, but it does. So leadership of people, get that culture right, those soft factors. From human machines, I quite like that term when that was coined under this hierarchical control to this more collaborative, autonomous, self-organising, and not completely, what's it called? There's a school of management, will come back to me, where you don't have any management. There's a company that promotes it. Sorry?
Holocracy?
Yes, holocracy, thank you. Yeah. Which you might like to explore, Holocracy, holocracy. We're not advocating that. There is a place for management, leadership, process, someone being in charge where that's appropriate. It's just the person in charge might be a member of the team who's in charge for a period of time or for an aspect. It isn't the senior director responsible. And moving from this self-interest of I need to keep a job, I need to hit my bonus, the metrics that we're given govern our behaviour. The pay we're given, the bonuses, the targets govern our behaviour. If we're given targets that encourage self-interest, we're going to be self-interested. If we're given ways of working where collectively we're recognised, remunerated, whatever that recognition is, we get that focus on what matters, which is the customer internal analytics. So why would you want to be? Why not just carry on as you are? Well, without going through the detail again, just pick out some of those headlines. To be responsive to change, to get products to market faster, to deliver better value for money for the business, for the shareholders, to create the culture where you want to go to work, where you put in the extra hour and don't necessarily book it, or you do something at the weekend. I'm not advocating weekend working or evening working because we're all connected to our PCs far too much now, but you go the extra mile because you want to for the collective good or the customer good, not because you have to, but because you get on time and a half. So there are all sorts of HRE personnel reasons, better quality outcomes, greater skilled workforce for doing this, internal reasons, but very good market, client, customer facing reasons why you would want to be, I would suggest, an agile business, an agile organisation. Picking out one or two of the critical factors, I've touched on this already, so I don't need to go too much further into it. But this is something from Accenture a couple of years ago on leadership. I quite like leaders prioritise strategic decisions, because I think that's probably a key thing. Perhaps touched upon that a little bit in the previous talk. You've got to pick out the things that matter and focus on those, and not get into the plethora of things you could be doing or might be doing. Classic example in John's talk earlier of scope creep, where it started here and it pervaded the whole company, and potentially the company would have imploded had they not redeemed themselves. So getting those decisions right was absolutely essential. They stepped back and worked out that that was the most important thing, and we completely agree with that, getting those decisions right. But then decision making a decision at the right level. So that not all the decisions go back up to the top. It's in these collective, self-autonomous, self-organized mindset was used in Winner's talk this morning, mindfulness in particular. And this came from the Learning Consortium. So that's Steve Denning, who was the director no longer of the Scrum Alliance, it was a sister organisation or subsidiary organisation called the Learning Consortium for the Creative Economy, that went out to 10 different companies, Microsoft and others. They did visits, so each company would visit all of the others and to see how agile working worked in practice. And from that, and this is on the Scrum Alliance website, I think the consortium having a separate website as well now, are the things that mattered to, or came out as things that mattered in terms of agility. And we picked up, innovation, enablement, autonomous teams, coordination of work, transparency, continuous improvement, open communication, and getting the physical workspaces right, which may or may not be the plan, but whatever is an appropriate agile way of working. So this is about an organisation, organisations, this is 10 organisations that shared these traits and characteristics, and it's a mindset that was pervasive at the executive level to make the change, but became the mindset of these companies, of these organisations. And then the third one is workforce engagement. And this again is about going the extra mile or getting the extra push from people who are committed to what they're trying to do, committed to their work, committed to their delivery, committed to their colleagues. And again, there's hard data here from various sources connected to research on income growth. Shareholder returns 22% higher where you have this workforce commitment. Harvard Business Review, I can't remember what year that was, 3.4 times more effective financially in total sales and revenue in just under 2,000 businesses, where customer satisfaction levels were higher, where people were engaged working with their customers. And then absence and well-being, 50% lower in the top quartile where people were engaged. Now these are hard financial metrics. You can put real money on cutting, in a big organisation, on cutting workforce absence. So as well as having a more engaged and happier workforce, you also save an awful lot, which goes to the bottom line because you haven't got twice the sickness that you otherwise would have. So the mood music, we'll just take a step right back, having looked at some of the values, having proposed that being agile is a good thing and there are tangible business benefits and there's data that backs that up, is, well, where are we in terms of business agility? What is the mood music? What are people out there saying? And there's a couple of quotes. Edwin Dando is an agile consultant strategist from New Zealand and chaired the Agile conference in New Zealand and in Australia. The trunk of the tree of Agile is Agile for technology, without question, and Agile for performance software, but it's sprouting all these different branches. Linda Holbeck, who's professor in management in this country, the wider notion of Agile organisation is still being developed. It is very early days. I mean, there are some companies that are only just introducing Agile into their IT functions. Quite genuine, some quite big companies that have only done that this year, last year, the year before. So Agile in the wider context is a bit of a leap. There are others who have had a lot of success from their IT Agile experience and are starting on a journey to pervade it more widely. And Dando also said this is probably a 100-year journey and the Agilists, i.e. the IT Agilists, just happen to be 10 to 15 years ahead of most. Well, given the Agile Alliance, all of that, the manifesto is 16 years old now, that's probably about right. And there's a long way to go, but we need people in the vanguard, whether it's IT Agile or wider business Agile. So there is a music that says this needs to happen. There are people out there, without dwelling on them, there are the big management consultants, there are smaller change management specialists. Belinda helps organise this event, amongst them being Agile, ThoughtWorks, ProSite and others. There are IT consultants that are starting to do business agility because they're being asked to, and big organisations using some of these consultants, both the PwCs of this world and the Agile coaches in a wider business program context. And there are various consortia and associations, including the DSDM Consortium, the Scrum Alliance, got some work going on business agility at the moment, and the Agile Future Forum, which was a body set up a couple of years ago by 20 big businesses here in the UK, again business-led, looking at agility, again, with lots of data behind. So there is an emerging market on the supply side, and there are companies and customers starting to adopt wider business agility. There are models emerging, there are various methods. These are just a sample, some from the Agile Future Forum, Agile Transformation with their Agile Health Model, ProSci with AdCar, Open Space Agility with their 100-day program. There's various things out there which you can sample, taste, try. There's no sort of common parlance yet for Agile business change. And that's something that we're looking at the DSDM Consortium looking towards now. It starts on the left-hand side with a need. It could be a client need or a wider market need, it could be an internal need, it could be an external need, through to fulfillment and a delighted customer. And in the blue, we've got, and I'll work backwards, product development, product evolution, which is where most people who are using Agile are using Agile, or projects, IT projects, software projects, programs, portfolios, and potentially strategy. Not a lot of Agile strategy goes on because it's underpinned by things like Agile budgeting. The Institute called the Beyond Budgeting Institute is interesting work with some large companies on getting away from the 3-year, 2-year, 1-year planning cycles to a much more cyclical and responsive budget cycle. So those are the things in blue, and they're sort of traditional project programs, portfolios, and so forth. In the fetching, whatever colour that is, pinky colour, we've got those softer factors. We've got leadership, culture, governance, enablement, things that you can't pin down in quite the same way that you can with the project framework, deliverables, Moscow, and all of those techniques. But what we're starting to see emerge, both at the specific level and in the round, is not yet a consensus, at least some work towards a common model of what Agile business change could deliver. The consortium, DSDM Consortium, does all of these things today in the software sense. It does publications, like this sort of thing, accreditation, training, mentoring, membership and events. We're exploring how that could go wider, and there will be some announcements on that in the coming weeks. But it's not DSDM alone is not going to make this happen. The same way that the DSDM didn't come together because one or two organisations, it was a collective of originally 16 organisations came together. There are these other bodies, the Agile Future Forum in London, the change management people, so the CMI Change Management Institute based out in Australia, New Zealand and Australia. We've got the US Scrum Alliance, Agile Alliance, and the well-named International Consortium for Agile, which isn't international and isn't a consortium, but apart from that, it sort of lives up to what it says on the tin. It's a private enterprise, but a good name from that.
It's like very small.
Yes. And almost my closing note, this has been about the Agile business towards the Agile organisation. The conference in Australia, held in June of this year, is Agile Australia towards an Agile country. So if you want a stake in the ground, if you want that product vision for however many years out, we're heading next for an Agile country, but first we focus on the Agile organisation. And is there scope for collaboration across these groups? There has to be, and that has to be our message, that we collectively work together within this country, with organisations from other countries to try and create these models. Thank you very much.